Welcome back to It Takes a Village, the podcast where we explore the power of community, connection, and belonging, and the evolving role of faith in our world today. I'm your host, Reverend Dr. Jenny Schultz Thomas, and today I have the great privilege and pleasure of welcoming a friend and colleague, Reverend Dr. Jim Keck, who is the minister at First Plymouth in Lincoln. Has been there for longer than I have been alive. So I'm so thankful to have you here today, Jim. Jim Keck is known for his insightful preaching, commitment to a big tent theology, inclusive commitment to both interfaith and ecumenical work, and his deep love for the church in general and its people. And he takes amazing photographs of churches from all over the UCC, all over the country, all over the world. So, Jim, how are you today? Thank you so much. Happy to have you on the podcast.
Hey, Jenny, good to see you.
Yes, it's a great day in Nebraska. We have 3 to 17 inches on the ground, depending on where you live and which news journalist you listen to.
Yeah, the weather scene's been dynamic lately, hasn't it?
That's right.
Hey, before we get into any conversation, I just want to say what a delight it is that you and Countryside found each other. I see that happen a lot around the country when a pastor comes and then it seems to either fit or not, but it seems like both of your spirits were made for each other. I mean, Countryside is such a dynamic, high energy, multi-faith, but yet authentic Christian church itself, vision and mission, and you bring that same kind of energy and expansiveness. So I'm just celebrating that they have you and you have them.
Thank you, Jim. I mean, what a great thing to start with. Alignment, right? Sort of alignment is at the heart of any celebration, any joyous occasion, especially in the church. I know that, high impact, high energy, that's kind of your jam too. Let's start with First Plymouth. Your church is known kind of nationally for your vibrant worship, your engaging outreach, big hearted theology. What, and I'm sure you could answer this in so many different ways, but you personally, you've been there, you've worked across the country, you kind of have your pulse on what's going on. What is bringing you the most joy in your ministry right now?
There's a lot of joy. So my mind is kind of scrolling through the most joy of the joys. But, when I first decided to come to this church, I was so amazed by their natural creativity and willing to experiment. So, First Plymouth as a church, we were performing same-sex marriages back in the mid-1980s. I mean, dial back the
Mm.
cultural clock on that. That's 20
Oh.
years before the Supreme Court even got around to thinking it was okay to marry folks. And that was it was part of First Plymouth's DNA to keep pushing. How inclusive should the love of Jesus Christ be? I mean, is there a
Mm.
limit to how inclusive? Well, no. I mean, with Jesus Christ, the Son of God, there shouldn't be any limits. It should be infinite, kind of growing
Mm.
into inclusivity and bigger love. So I remember, back in the mid 1980s, Otis Young was the pastor of the church, and when he began doing same-sex marriages in the sanctuary, a member approached him and said, "Pastor, we're a congregational church. Don't we get to vote on whether we do
Mm.
same-sex marriages at First Plymouth?" And his response, I thought, was incredibly courageous. He said, "Oh, you don't understand. We vote on what ministries to undertake, but we don't vote on people that we minister to. And
Mm.
the vote that you can take is whether to fire me."
Wow. Mm.
And the pretty courageous response. Uh,
Yeah.
but that was, and First Plymouth had been deeply involved in the women's movement of the 70s. And so liberative movements, again,
Mm.
movements that were trying to expand our notion of how loving we can be, how just,
Mm.
and of course, when I say loving, just is part of that.
Mhm.
I don't need to add any other words. Let's just keep being
Right.
loving as conceivably possible. Um, so that was long in the DNA of First Plymouth, and I was attracted to that. Then when I came, we became probably the first church in the entire middle part of the country to have a rabbi in residence. He
Mhm.
would do all our Hebrew scripture classes and lead worship. We were the first church in the middle part of America to have a full-time minister of climate change.
Mm.
And so again, there's this kind of long history of that. And now, right now, we're trying to envision, how do you really serve the poor in this time and place and context? Um,
Mm,
you know, Serving the poor has to be something more relational than just writing checks.
hmm
And we have the great blessing of being in a poor neighborhood. First Plymouth resides in the poorest census tract in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's 30% immigrant, and because that is our neighborhood, we've begun to explore uh, what is serving the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized in a more deeply relational way. That started last year when we found that many of the homes around the church were saddled with medical debt. I'm also realizing I'm engaging in a soliloquy, Jennifer. So cut the hell in anytime you.
No, I
Anytime
was
you
gonna say, I feel like my question was like, what are you most excited about? And it's clear that you're most excited about the gospel of Jesus Christ and how there's still room to push the church to live into it. I mean, you're being a great pastor right
no,
now, Jim.
yeah, no,
What else can I say?
just to keep pushing it. So yeah, so we found out a couple years ago that homes in our poor neighborhood had medical debt, that they were paying about $50 on a month. They would have two, three, $4,000 of medical debt. They're working poor, so they were paying their bill, but that's 50, $60. They would never get on top of the just $3,000 they
Mm,
owed, excuse me. So we decided to do something about that, and this was good debt. A local debt collector owned it. They were paying
mm,
on it, and they had the shackles on these people because they'd be paying on it for 30 years, right? 50 bucks
hmm
a month. So we cut a deal. We bought the debt from the debt collector at 96 cents on the dollar. This was, you hear these
Wow.
nonprofits that buy up medical debt, but they're buying up defaulted debt that's cheap in big tracts. We were trying to buy the debt of individual families in our neighborhood. And it
Wow.
took 96 cents on the dollar. We ended up buying up the debt of 400 homes around the church, and forgiving their medical debt completely. So we ended up we spent about $700,000 buying up the debt in the homes right around the church, and
Mm,
that put us in deep relationship with the neighborhood. And now we've continued to try. Right now, we're starting a program in a few months where we'll be offering zero interest car loans to working poor in our own neighborhood. Um,
nice.
so deeply relational. Like if you got a loan out with someone, you're in their lives. you're
Yeah,
you're
you're connected.
and obviously these zero interest car loans to poor folks, there'll be a default rate, but we'll completely backstop these loans. We'll try to stop it from nicking their credit rating, but they're adults and they have agency. This would nick their
Mm,
credit rating if they take a loan and
hmm
can't pay it off. Although we'd pay it off. We're partnering with a bank. We'd pay the bank.
hmm
Um,
Right.
but anyway, uh,
Wow.
I gotta stop talking. Tell me how
Yeah, no,
you are. No, it's boring
I'm
to hear.
wondering. No, I'm wondering how for everyone listening too. There's so much that we talk about when like reaching the poor. I mean, just look at the Pope. This century. The last several decades, and the poor is always among us, right? Well, Jesus said, "Well, the poor will always be among us." You talk about the poor, but the thing you keep saying is two things, like relationship and your neighborhood. So I want to hear. I want you to expand on why it was so important for First Plymouth to decide we're going to look in our own neighborhood and really invest in these relationships. I mean, clearly it's, Jesus calls us to, but beyond that, how can you really tell us how you engage this?
Well, it also feels like when the world is particularly chaotic, and when our own government, when the U.S. government seems particularly confused and if not wayward, and I won't talk about any particular administration, but you know what I'm talking about.
Never.
And then that means either you go to complete disempowerment because what can I do? Uh, and you just get paralyzed, or you realize doing serving the poor that are in your own community is the greatest form of resistance, rather than sloganeering on social media, rather than just putting out memes about what you think. To actually serve the poor right around you is, I think, the strongest, most important form of resistance there is
Mm,
to the powers that play in our world.
yeah. To the powers that play in our world, take that. Car loans and 96 cents on the dollar. And these are the kinds of things that they don't make the headlines. These are not sensationalist ideas that people are, excited about. But this that you just shared, I know that you've got something else, kind of going with this like House of Hope. Talk about that. Like how has and then how you see First Plymouth's relationship evolving and changing with your neighborhood due to these kind of commitments that you've made. So how does all of this string together with sort of the ethos of your congregation right now?
Yeah. So First Plymouth is this historic architectural gem that's now
Right.
in a very poor neighborhood. So consequently, we look a little bit like an Anglo fortress, this nice built big brick building in the midst
Mm,
of some fairly devastated neighborhoods. Um, uh, and so what happened over the years, we had a big heart, so we always gave lots of money to the neighborhood. But that would
mm-hmm,
be so we have homeless folks, schizophrenic folks, disabled folks walking in the building and sleeping around the building all the time. But what we
mm-hmm,
would do is they would come in and we'd give them $50 or and we started realizing just handing out, oh, here's $200 for your electric bill, or we just handing money out had a toxic quality to it.
mm,
It not only robbed them of agency and dignity, it it uh, it had a paternalistic kind of
mm.
uh, uh, well, it didn't help us either to do it.
Yeah.
And so at one point we decided there were so many people coming by for money just during the day, we would only give out money one day a week, and then we had a line down the hallway and we couldn't figure out what to do. And then that's where it evolved. We had to be more relational rather than just handing out money.
Mm,
And so part of this Hope House is going to be very deep relation. So we have a home on the church property that we're going to transform into the Hope House. First and foremost, we're now training 35 of our own people to be navigators. They will be in that little home. And when someone from the neighborhood comes, they can immediately navigate them to all the social services in the town and do
mm,
warm handoffs. That means like drive them there or
mm-hmm,
help make the calls with them while they're there and help connect. But also that Hope House is going to create a good old fashioned form of mutual aid society where the neighborhood itself will create a mutual aid society with First Plymouth. So instead of First Plymouth just handing somebody $50 or $500, the neighborhood will take all the requests, and a neighborhood mutual aid society that we will create with them. Well, then neighborhood people will decide who gets the, because they know their own neighbor. They go, hey, Joe,
mm,
Joe's asked us for $500 10 times. We're not going to do it this month. The neighborhood will
mm,
know whether to give Joe $500 better than we will.
mm.
And it also weaves the neighborhood even more together. So that
Yeah.
host help will have a mutual aid society, a navigation system, other social services, as well as some immediate triage free mental health. We're going to have
Mm.
therapists available for free immediate mental health. And then also those car loans will be run out of the Hope House as well.
Nice. Yeah, so you're really just talking about kind of taking the model that for a long time has been sort of within the church. Just think about our benevolence committees who people come in, well, you get X. Oh, you've been here 17 times, Joe. We'll see you next month. So now you're putting that down to
In
bringing
the
it into
neighborhood.
the neighborhood.
In the neighborhood.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
so great. So I want to shift gears.
Excuse me, Jenny. First, let me ask: do you need $50?
I was gonna say later, Jim, because we're still, talking online. I was gonna
Oh
ask you to
wait,
buy
this
my coffee.
is this being recorded?
Oh my gosh. Who told him? Yeah, so $50, I would like to say I'm gonna start donating all my coffee intake to House of Hope. But one of the things I've always admired about you, and I think First Plymouth looking on, is that you always have a hopeful vision for the church, for the church at large, right? And so you've just kind of shared this hopeful vision that you have for your own community congregation. But there's been a lot of talk. I mean, I did my own sort of dissertation work on, during COVID, the decline of the church and how we could look at the maker movement and arts culture to revive us. And, that got us really far. So we're always pulling at strings, but really, honestly, it's a dead story, right? The mainline church is dying. And I've heard you say it too, right? We're done listening. But I would love to hear what gives you hope about the mainline church right now, even though we know these sort of numbers. And where do you see the church thriving and growing in the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah, I actually have a ton of hope for the future of the Christian church in America, which also includes the main line, which is a particular expression of the Christian faith in America. I believe in the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to see another religious awakening in America, and we'll be
Mm,
swept up as part of that. You know, in America, there's been four major religious awakenings. They happen about every 80 years. The first one was in the early 1700s with uh, very revival preacher driven by George Whitefield coming from England and Jonathan
mhm,
Edwards in Massachusetts, and people were called back to God. And religious awakening in America is when suddenly there's a blossoming of new religious intensity. People become more involved in their local churches, more involved in the actual practice of religion. And then about every 80 years, one happened in the early 1800s. That also morphed into the early women's movement, anti-slavery and abolitionist movements, temperance movements and stuff. So you saw this upsurge. Then in the early 20th century was also merged with the social gospel, the idea that we could be building the kingdom, that society could be godly, and a
mm,
new infusion of energy. And then in the mid 1950s, with kind of the Billy Graham sensibility of a new evangelicalism, it's not some mean fundamentalism. You just want people to take Jesus in their heart and,
mhm.
uh, and be born again. Well, I think we're ready for another major religious awakening. Uh, Even though the numbers have been under serious downward pressure, it's now only 63% of Americans say that they're Christian. When I began at First Plymouth 20 years ago, it was 78% of Americans.
Mm.
I blame my own ministry. Somehow I've moved people away from Christ. So
Oh,
only 62%, fully 30% of Americans say they don't belong to any religion at all. And then only about 6% of Americans come from some other religion. That's adding Muslims, Hindus, Jews, all the Shintoism, Confucianism, Buddhism,
mhm,
it's all only 6% of America. So, by the way, when people say we're religiously diverse, our problem is we have a too far much of a super majority. People that
mm,
come from Christian traditions or are Christian adjacent is almost 90% of our population. So no
mhm,
American has even been to Shabbat on Friday night at the synagogue, or been to Friday night prayers at a mosque, or been to a Hindu temple and poured coconut milk over statues.
mm,
Americans don't know. So part of what the Tri-Faith is doing that's so wonderful is just increasing religious literacy in America.
mhm,
Anyway, I think this revival is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, and it's going to be based around a couple factors. One, this century has been called the antisocial century. Americans are isolating. They're cocooning at home. 75% of restaurant meals last year, people picked up. They didn't eat at the restaurant. People aren't gathering in groups like they used to. The internet helps people isolate. The way we built homes, they cocoon. The typical adult female in America spends more time with her pet than with her friends. The
mhm.
typical adult male in America spends 7 times as much watching television as time with his friends.
My
Um,
gosh.
so we're not gathering in groups. I think this is devastating to the human spirit, um,
Mhm,
and I think we're
definitely.
going to see a major rebound. Emil Durkheim, one of the great sociologists of American religion, 100 years ago, when he was trying to determine what is the essence of religion, what is religion really doing, he looked at humanity across the expanse of time, and humanity is usually their life is filled with menial tasks. Like when you're a hunter gatherer, you just got to take care of shelter and food all day long. But every once in a while, the tribe would gather around the fire, and there'd be
Mhm,
dancing and singing, and there'd be ritual, and there'd be something pointing to transcendence, and you'd be pulled out of the mundane into something greater than yourself. And he called that collective effervescence, that when the tribe
yeah,
would gather, you experienced a type of joy, a type of energy, collective effervescence that was transformational. And so I think we're going to realize we're missing collective effervescence in our lives. And so
mhm,
that's what will spark a spiritual revival. People they'll want the tribe to gather again around the fire and singing and rituals and pointing to the transcendent. That's the key.
Mm-hmm.
Like a football game creates collective effervescence, but
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't point to God. It doesn't point to
Right.
transcendence. Um,
Well, sometimes they kneel and they point upward, and
yeah,
they're definitely.
it's a lot of personal piety for sure. But so I think collective effervescence
Mm-hmm.
will be. I also think that a lot of folks have fallen into this notion that spirituality is somehow not very scientific, and a lot
Mm,
of people that aren't involved in religion hear these weird supernatural claims from religion and just think, well, that's kind of, they fashion themselves as very scientific, rational thinkers.
mm-hmm.
But I think there's a mistake here. In no way is religion scientific. And uh, I think more and more people are going to come to realize there is a spiritual reality. And in fact, they have direct contact themselves with a non-physical reality. It's
Mm,
They have consciousness. Even
mm-hmm.
science can't describe how is it that a bunch of atoms collect in your body to form your body, and then suddenly the subjective realm of values and love and hope, consciousness emerges. That scientists can't figure that out because indeed it is a non-physical realm. It's the spiritual realm we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And people have direct contact to it. It's not opposed to science. It's real. And when we say God is love, well, a force field can't love.
Mm,
Energy can't love. The only thing that can love is a consciousness. So God is an infinite consciousness,
mm.
as the old Christian faith put it, God is a person. We don't mean arms and legs. We know God doesn't have arms and legs, but when you say person, you mean a consciousness,
Mm,
a will, a unified will and hope and dream. And so people are going to come to this understanding that consciousness is the thing we know most directly, and God is an
mm,
infinite consciousness. God is real. I am real. God is real,
mm.
and that I think that's going to create this that spiritual reality absolutely exists. Um, and then
Yeah.
lastly, I think there's going to be a revival because uh, I think human beings are sensing there's moral degradation underway. There's moral decay. We're losing
Mm,
hold of what makes us noble, and it's the basic values of being honest and kind and gentle and just and loving. And I'm telling you, people are sensing our society is becoming more crass,
mm-hmm.
more self-centered, more sideways. And I think when that happens, I really believe there'll be an upwelling of wanting to stride forward morally. And what religion does better than anything else is it wraps collective effervescence around morality. It
Mm-hmm.
Because we have to get together and get fired up to be better people and create a better society. So that collective effervescence around morality, I mean, what makes a human being noble, all those basic
Mm,
values of courage and perseverance and love and hope and justice, all the values.
mm-hmm.
And so those factors, I think, will create a religious awakening.
Well, I'm here for it. When you're talking about this collective effervescence, have you read or studied Dr. Keltner? He has that new book out called Awe. He's
Oh,
actually, that he
is
created
he
those
picking up on
movies.
Abraham Heschel? Is he picking up Abraham
Yeah,
Heschel's work?
he's got well, he's like a social scientist who studies happiness, right? So that now he has these 8 wonders of awe, and one of them is collective effervescence, right? And so I was going to ask you, after we were talking, to explain sort of for listeners as we think of the state of the church, the state of the union right now, the lack of stability and all the things that we're naming, how the collective effervescence piece is so powerful. But then what drives people from the football game to seek out the transcendent, right? And so moral decay, obviously, number one. But as you think of this revival, right, within the church, it's oftentimes that the church is not leading the way as we should, but ceding the way to those outside who are pressing forward and leading. So how do you see the role of the church, even, folks like
Yeah.
you and I, what kind of skill set, what kind of, are we going to be Buddhists? Are we going to train in sort of like contemplative, spirituality? What are the kind of skill sets that churches or leaders or those seeking to lead the way will need? I mean, is it technology? Is it, you know, people have all kind of thoughts about this, but what do you see those kind of skills and leadership needs to awaken this new dawn?
It's an interesting question because I haven't thought of it as skill sets before the way you're describing it. I I mean, I will say that the religious awakenings in the past were were kind of fear-based. It was, you better accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, or you're going to hell.
Right.
And that
Jonathan Edwards.
and I got to tell you, that basic evangelical equation has an intensity about it. It can fire people up. Yeah, Jonathan Edwards, you're dangling over the pit of
Yeah.
hell. But that continued in some version in all those religious awakenings, was still that evangelical equation. You better come to Jesus or you're in trouble. Uh, and that kind of fear-based, I don't think it's going to be the same. I think it's going to be more love-based, that rather than saving the individual soul, and I don't believe in a place of eternal damnation anyway. I think this will be more that you're called to that more expansive love that we know in Jesus Christ. So it's going to be more on the positive side of wanting to be ennobled in the human spirit rather than just saving my own hide, right?
Maybe the hell of
Yeah,
your life, maybe the hell
yeah,
of the
yeah.
universe that
So
you're
the
saving
only
yourself from.
Yeah, and so for me, the only basic skill set of the Christian church is to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. That kind of love that always beckons you to reach out to others and to join together in the common good. So it's hard for me to get to skill sets when, for me, it's still gonna rely, in my mind, on devotion to Jesus Christ. Without, because that's the intensity of believing He is, for me, He is that divine light in which I am called to be part of. And without that, then when you get to skills, I think, we were talking about what local churches can do in practical ways to be involved in justice work and serving the poor and raising consciousness, et cetera, et cetera. And we could talk a lot about those mechanics, but first and foremost for me, if it's not a skill, it's a love of Jesus Christ.
Well, yeah, you said it. So this is Reverend Dr. Jim Keck. He's talking about the state of the mainline church, the hope that he has for the Church Universal, and really the commitment to the gospel. In every generation, we see students, young people across the diversity spectrum asking brave, bold questions, resisting the status quo, finding a place to belong. And one of the things that we continue to see in the mainline church, especially in our own Reformed tradition, the UCC, is that young people are continually pushing us to ask deeper questions. And so not the skill set, but really the faith in Jesus. It looks different every iteration of young people leading, and then across time, how the church becomes a different version of what we've always been. And so maybe this commitment to our faith in Jesus as the illuminator of the love that we know and experience looks different across time, but it also has a sameness, right? That is compelling, that is everything, that draws us in. So it's making sure, and I would say, Jim, that we both have served congregations who thrive and see this at the center. And then there are a lot of congregations who would just have not been as resourced or are disparate, not as connected in our denomination and in others. And so the work of creating networks, creating neighborhood community centers, so that not everyone has to be the same iteration of church, but together we can kind of build this bridge like a chain link, right? That we are all connected to God's emanating spirit. So I love what you've shared. What are your final thoughts for us? This has been such a rich conversation.
It's good hanging out with you. I feel like I just got off babbling like ministers do, rather than,
Never.
Because you're bringing so much to this work. At some point, we should have a conversation that's a lot more back and forth. I felt like I just talked at the computer screen a lot.
No, this is what we are interviewing you. People want to hear what you're doing. And I know that I'm not the only one who's watched First Plymouth and your ministry, looking for what you and Oda, your former, your predecessor called, experimenting in the life of the church and taking risks for the sake of Jesus. It matters.
I do. It does. Thank you. And I do think I will say one of the big challenges these days is that church has been reconfigured since COVID. So for example, now in a place like First Plymouth, a lot of people, we're over 4,000 members, and a lot of those members would come about 8 times a year. And that's kind of fairly regular. They'd miss a month, but then they'd stop by. And 8 times a year is enough to be in good relationship. What COVID did, we didn't lose any members, but those people that came 8 times a year now come 6 times a year or 5 times a year. And the people that used to come 14 times a year now come 8 times a year. And what I'm finding is it makes relationship a little harder if I'm because we also had whole lot of people that came only 6 times a year. Now they only come twice. If I only see somebody twice a year with
Mm-hmm.
the community, and that's a big hard change. And so now we have um, so many people worshiping with us digitally.
Mm-hmm.
But to create community, relationship, and inspiration is more difficult. Are you experiencing that at Countryside?
Oh, for sure. I think that we're in that place of understanding who we are, who our members, who our neighbors are. And as people have always journeyed at their own discretion, we might have somebody in Colorado for 6 months or across the seas. So it's understanding what it takes to build community. And you have to start, we're starting in a different place, right? We might get to the same places with just trying new things, but we're asking questions from a different angle than we used to. And I think that's going to keep us really connected to the heart of what people are seeking and needing from the church. And that evolves and changes all the time. I think the question for us is always, well, we are here to walk alongside you, right? To hold the hand, not here to lead you, not here to, hound you, but to be that partner with you. So it's the hard part is what you're talking about, the listening. You can't really listen to someone when you only see them once a year. And so it's sort of, what do you need? How can we communicate with you? So you just have to throw things to the wall and say, okay, Jesus, I know you're out there, I'm going to throw a splat here and trust that, spirit is going to connect the dots on those things. And if it falls to the ground, hey, it falls to the ground. We just try something new. But it is a challenge. I think we're on that ever evolving faith roller coaster together. But I think the beauty is that we are doing this work together. The Spirit of God is with and within us. We are in community here in Omaha and Lincoln. We have some great faith partners across Nebraska, across the country. So God is with us, even though the world would like us to believe other than, right? God is with and within. Always, always, always. And God is good all the time. So, Jim, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, and I really do thank God for Countryside. Your mission and ministry together as a community there is just so inspiring, and you're showing the way in a pluralistic world to be faithful disciples of Jesus Christ, but recognize
Mm.
there are other paths to God. There are other types of,
Oh,
and that witness is transformational. Thank you for it.
oh, it's beautiful. What a gift. Our partners here on the Tri-Faith Commons are also so thankful for our commitments and relationships with the wider church. So we are all universally living God's love, right? No matter which ladder or mountain we climb, we are all leaning into that higher state of consciousness. So, friends, thank you for joining us on It Takes a Village. I think we don't have to say it more than once. It takes a village to get from where we are now to where we're going, knowing that the path is always love. If you are with us today, you can reach out to either one of us, to either of our faith communities. If you'd like to know more about Jim, please go to the website at First Plymouth Congregational Church in Lincoln. They're doing some awesome, exciting things. And here we are in Omaha Countryside. We're always here for you. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.